In the original 1611 King James Version of the Bible, at the very beginning there's a note from the translators to the reader. And in this note, they said a little bit about the Greek Septuagint. And I want to point this out here. They said here, the translation of the 70, meaning the translation of the Septuagint, they said the translation of the 70 dissenteth from the original in many places. Neither doeth it come near it for perspicuity, gravity, majesty. Yet which of the apostles did condemn it? Yet which of the apostles did condemn it? Condemn it? Nay, they used it, as it is apparent, and as St. Jerome and most learned men do confess, which they would not have done, nor by their example of using it, so grace and commend it to the church, if it had been unworthy the appellation and name of the Word of God. Now, I don't know if you understood that, but this is Old English. This is Old 1611 English. Basically, what they're saying here is they're saying the translation of the 70, the translation of the Greek Septuagint, dissenteth. They basically are saying it's different from the original. Okay, so basically what they're saying is they're saying that the Greek Septuagint is different from the original Hebrew. It's different from the original Hebrew in many places. Neither does it come near it for perspicuity, gravity, majesty. Okay. Yet which of the apostles did condemn it? Yet which of the apostles did condemn it? Which of the apostles condemned the Greek Septuagint? And so they continue up here. They say, condemn it? Nay, they used it. In other words, they're saying, condemn it? No, the apostles, they used it. They used the Greek Septuagint. They're saying that the disciples used the Greek Septuagint, as it is apparent, and as St. Jerome and most learned men do confess, which they would not have done, nor by their example of using it, so grace and commend it to the church. In other words, they're basically saying, by the apostles' example of using the Greek Septuagint, they also gave it to the church. The word grace here basically means the word they're using the word grace here in a kind of a Old English way, but basically they're saying they would also give it and commend it to the church. So they're basically saying that the apostles basically gave the Septuagint to the church. By their example of using the Greek Septuagint, they also commended the Septuagint to the church. And so they're basically saying that the apostles would not have done so if it had been unworthy of the appellation and name of the Word of God. The appellation, what is the word appellation here? It doesn't mean the Appalachian Mountains or something. The word appellation in this case basically means if it had been unworthy of the title and the name of the Word of God. The word appellation here basically means title. So they're saying that the apostles would not have recommended the Septuagint to the church if it had been unworthy of the title and name of the Word of God. It's kind of hard to understand this Old English, but you have to look up some of these words in the dictionary and kind of figure out what they're saying. And so the King James translators themselves are saying, did the apostles, did they condemn the Greek Septuagint? Condemn it? Nay, they used it. No, they didn't condemn the Septuagint. They used it, as it is apparent, and as St. Jerome and most learned men do confess. And so the apostles would not have condemned the Septuagint, nor by their example of using it, so also give it to the church. They would not have done that if it had been unworthy of the title and name of the Word of God. That's basically what they're saying here. And then they go on, and whereas they urge for their second, well, it's hard to read the rest of this. In order for me to read any of this, I have to basically study it for like 3 hours just to read one sentence. But my point is that the King James translators themselves, in their, their note from the translators to the reader, they are acknowledging that the apostles used the Septuagint. The translation of, well, that's how they referred to it back then. The translation of the 70. That's how, because the word Septuagint means 70. So the translation of the 70, the translation of the Septuagint, yeah, it dissenteth from the original. In other words, it's different than the Hebrew in many places. Yet, which of the apostles did condemn it? Which of the apostles condemn it? Condemn it? Nay, they used it, which they would not have done, nor by their example of using it, so also give it to the church, if it had been unworthy the title and name of the Word of God. And so the King James translators themselves are acknowledging that the apostles used the Greek Septuagint. They didn't condemn it, they used it. And by their example of using it, they also commended it to the church. And they would not have commended it to the church if it was unworthy the title and name of the Word of God. So it's crazy how many people there are who are these King James onlyists. King James, King James, King James. You got to trust the King James. It's kind of like that guy in that song, Because I Got High, Because I got high, because I got high. And that's what people are doing, They're high on King James Onlyism, Oh, I would have studied the Septuagint, but then I got high on King James Onlyism, and so because I got high on King James Onlyism, I couldn't do any research and find out what the King James translators themselves had to say, because I'm too high on King James Onlyism. I mean, how many people who are these King James only cult members, how many of them have actually bothered to even read this note from the translators to the reader at the beginning of the King James? Of course, it's only in the original printing. Modern copies of the King James probably don't have this. But yeah, there are some people who are so high on this cultish King James only belief, they haven't even bothered to study and to read what even the King James translators themselves had acknowledged. They're saying, condemn it? Did the apostles condemn the King James version? Or did the apostles condemn the Greek Septuagint? No, they used the Septuagint. And by their example of using it, they also recommended it to the church. And they would not have done so if it was unworthy of the title and name of the Word of God. The apostles would not have done that if the Septuagint wasn't the Word of God. And yet, what is it that King James onlyists do today? They condemn the Greek Septuagint. They condemn it. That's exactly what King James translators, or that's exactly what King James onlyists do today. They condemn the use of the Greek Septuagint. They condemn the use of the translation of the 70. And yet even the King James translators themselves acknowledged that the apostles did not condemn the Septuagint. They used it, and they commended it to the church. It's really crazy. And yet some people will say that the Septuagint didn't even exist until 200 years after the apostles. Really crazy. You should read this. Read this note. You can find it online, and you got to look up a lot of these words in the dictionary, because it's really hard to understand. But if you look up a lot of these words in the dictionary, then you'll be able to have some kind of an idea as to what they're saying. But it's just crazy how there's so many weird King James only cult members who they don't know anything about church history. They haven't read this note from the King James translators. They don't have a clue what they're talking about. But I'll tell you what, if you ever get this original printing of the King James, which is what this is, it's a photocopy replica of the original King James. It's really cool. As a matter of fact, it even has, look at that, it's a unicorn. Look at that. See, it's a horse, and it has a horn on its head. The King James Bible even has unicorns. Well, not really. This is the, what is this? The seal of the king. Yeah, this is the king's seal, and it had a unicorn on it. The unicorns in the King James are actually the rhinoceros. But, actually, I think even the King James translation itself acknowledges that it's a rhinoceros somewhere. I thought it had a marginal note somewhere. But yeah. Okay, yeah, here it is. This is in Isaiah 34, verse 7. It says, and the unicorns that come down with them. And next to the word unicorn, what do we see? A marginal note. What does it say? Or rhinoceros. Rhinocerots. So the marginal note of the King James admits that the unicorns are actually rhinos. So yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. The only weird thing about this translation is that they claim it to be an exact photocopy replica of the original King James, and for the most part it is. But there's one small way in which it is not, and that is in the table of contents. Yeah, this is it. This is the table of contents right here. It's just so crazy what they did. Okay, the names in order of all the books of the Old and New Testament. So here's the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. You know, there's the Old Testament books. And the books of the New Testament. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then there's this empty spot. What is this empty spot? This is so crazy. Okay. Basically, the New Testament, the books of the New Testament, is supposed to be down further. And this empty spot is supposed to be up here in the middle. In this middle section. Okay. This is where the Apocrypha was. Okay, the original King James included the apocryphal section in between the Old and New Testament. And it's so weird that, you know, they say this is a exact photocopy replica of the original King James, which I think that's what it says at the beginning, right? Okay, what does it say? Digitally remastered replica, page by page. How can you call it a replica when it's not truly it's not truly replicating the table of contents? They literally removed the apocryphal section. They removed it. They literally photoshopped it out. It's missing. It's blank. And they took it from the middle part and they blanked out the middle apocryphal section. They stuck it down here. Completely photoshopped out. But it's a replica. What are you doing? I actually have on my computer here a PDF of the original King James. So if you want to really know what was in the King James, you kind of got to get a PDF. And I can kind of scroll through the pages here. And from the translators to the reader. So you don't actually have to buy a physical copy. You can just download this PDF. But if I scroll down, let's see here. So easy to do on a Mac. Scroll down to page 36 and see this will show you what the table of contents actually looks like. Okay, this is what the table of contents is. This is what the table of contents actually looks like. There's the books of the Old and New Testament, and you know, Genesis to Malachi, and then there's the books of the books called Apocrypha, the apocryphal books in between, Maccabees and all that stuff, Tobit and Judith, and then the books of the New Testament. And so this is this is what the King James table of contents actually looked like in the original King James. This is a real photocopy replica. And so That's why it's so funny to me that they change that. You know, when you get this paper copy. Oh yeah, it's a photocopy replica of the original King James, except that we edited it. It's a replica. It's a replica. We just photoshopped out the Apocrypha and stuck it at the bottom. Isn't that weird? Here's the Old Testament, here's the New Testament, and then, oh yeah, the Apocryphal section. Let's pay no attention to the men behind the curtain, you know. Pay no attention to the Apocryphal books that we photoshopped out of this replica. It's a replica, but we photoshopped out the Apocrypha. They photoshopped it. They literally photoshopped out the Apocrypha in between the Old and New Testament. Like, how sketchy is that? That's so weird. And I don't know why they did that. And I don't know why the seal is missing also. Yeah, that's weird. Why is the seal of the king is missing? The seal of the king, what's up with that? Well, I don't know. I guess there's different copies of it. But yeah, that is so weird that they would do that. That they would take that out. And this is an actual real replica of the King James, you know. The Holy Bible containing the Old and New Testament, translating from the original. I don't know if it mentions King James at all, but it's really weird that they would do that. And I tell you what, though, and some of this is in color as well. Like at the beginning, some of that was in red. Yeah. So the original actually was in color. It was in red. Interesting stuff. And you can scroll down and scroll down and scroll down. And where am I? In the book of Jonah. I wish there was an easier way to navigate this. But, oh well. So here's Matthew. And then back up a little bit and back up a little bit more. And where am I? See, look, now I'm in Maccabees. Hey, look at that. Look at that. Maccabees, Apocrypha. This was in the original King James. Go figure. Anyway.